Welcome to Nico Props. I'm Chris Fry, also known as Nicodemus. So today we're going to be going through two-part silicone mold making, and I'm going to show you how I made this two-part mold. This is just out of a Polytech silicone, Polycraft silicone I think actually. So that is Polycraft GP3481. This is the catalyst for that. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I cast with that. We're also going to be using the vacuum chamber, which isn't actually necessary to do silicone, and also going to be using a food mixer for mixing, but you don't have to do that. You can just use some of these mixing cups and some tongue depressors. Don't mix too much air into it, and we'll show you both methods effectively while I talk through it. And that's going to give you an idea on basically basic silicone molds. I like to use for my silicone molds, some people build walls and then turn it over and things like that. I actually use some of these wooden L shapes basically. So these I just make up with a couple of screws. That's just personal preference, you don't have to do that. Alright, let's dive straight into it. Okay, so today we're going to be creating the mould for this little Mega Man figure. The idea is that I want to make a mould of this, and then I'm going to test out some casting techniques for doing metallized surfaces. Now, this was something I just got from Loot Crate. I've super glued it to the bottom of a piece of acrylic, and I've super glued all the joints together. It's only as something to test with. I'm not actually bothered about this being a bit rough or anything like that. It's just so that the silicone wouldn't seep in between. I thought it might look kind of cool and gold or something as well. So we're going to try that out. So what I'm going to do, bring in a piece of wood, put my Mega Man on there. I'm going to try and bring this in a little bit. There we go. Bring my Mega Man in a bit. And we're going to use these L-shaped pieces of wood that I've cut and just screwed together. And the idea is that we will do that with it to create the mould walls. Now what I want to do first though, before I create those mould walls, I'm going to make sure that my pieces of wood are sitting flat for a start. That way is better. That's better for that one. Which means this one has to go in the opposite way. That's not too bad, right. So we'll put them together. I want to make sure around the outside edge I have a reasonable amount of room for the mould. I don't want too much because I don't want to waste any silicone, so that's probably sufficient there. I'm going to use a pencil just to draw around the outside boundary of the box. This is going to give me an idea of where to put my oil-based clay later on. Okay, so we've got a nice square around the box. You can see now the boundary that I'm having. It's about 1.5 to 2 centimeters around the outside. I don't want too much, but then I don't want too little either. Okay, so let's have a look at our model. It's fairly flat on the back, and we're going to want to come up halfway for a parting line. So what I'm thinking is we roll out some plasticine or oil-based clay. I bring this in at the side. So I'm just using the new Plast oil-based clay again. I've already got some that I used for a previous mould. So I'm going to roll some of this out, and I've got a jig here. You see this jig's just a piece of wood or MDF with a couple of MDF battens on there, and the idea is it's just going to give me a 12mm thickness consistently. Now normally I would use a piece of PVC pipe or a wine bottle or something like that. I don't have any, so I'm using a tube of grab adhesive that I happen to have, because I can't find the the PVC pipe that I would normally use. So let's roll this out. This will give me a nice consistent thickness. Now if I was using a clay block, I could also use this jig with a wire, and I could put the block down on the top and then pull the wire across, but because I'm using this oil-based clay, I need to roll it out. So it's got a bit of fiberglass stuck in it. There's fiberglass everywhere again. Give it a quick trim so that I can fit it together with other blocks later. Push that down. Okay. And we just kind of rinse and repeat here until it's done. Move that up a little bit so we can see it well. It's a bit of a tedious process, this. Just constantly massaging. And rolling it out. Connect these bits together as best I can. What I might do actually is trim this first. Give me an idea where to trim this other block. And as we squidge things around, we're probably going to have to trim this up again. Somewhere around there. About that. So you can get the idea that we're basically creating a block for him to sit in, and then don't need to worry too much about the middle of it. I can just create this boundary and then fill in behind him later. Here. Yes. So what I'm going to do, cut a little bit extra off that bottom edge so that the base can kind of sit in like that. I'm going to have to cut it in a bit more. in there. Right, so he's going to sit in here. So I will need to cut a couple of divots out for this base to stick through. Mark that up. Peel that out a bit. Use one of my clay tools to help me with this, I think. Now be able to slot him in like that. I'm going to push him in so the base touches the bottom. So what that's actually done is that has pushed him in to the base a bit. Now all I've got to do is fill around the outside effectively. See all these little gaps, just fill all those and this is ready to go. And obviously between his legs, so we can just take a few lumps, roll them up into a little ball and just keep dropping them in and pack that out basically. And then using some more of these clay tools to kind of push that in there. Until we've filled that void. Doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but what we can do is use some of these other tools to kind of blend this in, just to make sure it is all right along the edges here. It needs to be tight up against the piece. To be perfect, so, and then all the way around the edges here you just want to make sure it's all tightly sealed into the piece. We don't want any kind of gaps here. We just work our way around, making sure it's all nice and smooth, not too many bumps and lumps. Smooth that out with my finger a bit. So we've got a few little voids in here that we can fill just by pushing some oil-based clay in there. What we probably should have done in the middle was just stuck a big lump so that we didn't have to keep doing as much of this, but never mind. Just making sure it's nice and close, but not leaving any sticking up or anything on the actual part itself. Stick a little blob in there. Piece in there, we might need to just push some in. You can see on the other side that the ear cup was actually half embedded, but this one isn't. That's fine. Okay, so now we have our figure on the board. It's reasonably smooth around the outside. So then we bring this in again, like so. What we want to do is kind of clamp that in like that. I'm going to go get some clamps for that. A couple of pump clamps should do that just fine. Right. Let's do that this way. be able to pump this clamp so that it closes around this. Actually, what I'm going to do, turn that over so that the weight of the clamp isn't pulling the mould around too much. That's clamped in. Now what I need to do is go all the way around the edge again and seal it into the wood. What I might do is use this one for now, just a plastic tool. You can do it with your finger, but sometimes a tool was just easier to get into those corners and things. And again, if you haven't cut it quite square, you may have to fill in parts. Tiny void in the corner. So take a small sausage of this, put that in. So now that's up against the edges, I'm just going to use my finger to go around the outside and smooth it out a bit. That's as smooth as I'm happy with. So I can bring this up for you. And then what I'm going to do, move these clay tools out of the way. I'm going to take, this is a paintbrush that I've super glued a round-headed, dome-headed nut onto, and I use that for the keying in. So the idea is I'm going to push holes into the plasticine. I need to decide where my pour point is as well, which I'm going to do on the bottom here. So I will leave a space to cut that later. And this keying in is so that the two halves of the mould fit together perfectly without so it can't go together wrong, and it kind of slots together absolutely perfectly. We go around all the way around the outside and leave a gap in the middle. And I'll lift this up and show the camera in a moment. Once I've got all of these in. So this is called keying in. You can see I've left a space at the bottom there for my pour point that I'm going to cut later. Okay, so now all that's left to do, let's lift it up. Now all that's left to do is to fill this up with silicone. So what I'm doing here is just kind of taking the mixing bowl off the food mixer that I use for my silicone and popping it on the scales. So you've got to weigh out your silicone, and to work out how much I needed, I did a volume calculation on the mould. So height times width times depth equals the cubic centimeters for the mould, and I did it in centimeters deliberately so that basically it's roughly 1 gram of of silicone to a cubic centimetre. So I usually work out that, and then I add a bit on extra. So if it's like 270 as an example, I would round that up to 300 of silicone that I'd actually want. So I always add a bit on extra. So it's quite thick is the silicone, so it goes into the tub in quite large lumps. So I'm trying to get 600 grams here. That big lump's going to tip it right over. And then the next thing is that I need to add in the catalyst at a ratio of 10%. Basically, so this is the catalyst that I'm going to be bringing in a second. I'm just asking my colleague to bring me a cup so that I can weigh my catalyst out. That's Stuart Jeffrey in the background, one of the Mandalorian mercs. So there's your catalyst. That's the Polycraft catalyst. It's red. Give it a good shake before using it, and I need 10% of that. So about 60 grams, 61 grams of that. This is what I'm measuring out there. I'd like to point out, actually, at the same time as doing this video, I was teaching Stuart how to do silicone moulding, so there are some pauses while I explain things as I go along and get the scales out of the way and bring the food mixer in. So I've got the bowl already in the food mixer. This is just a standard kitchen mixer, benchtop style. I think this is a really old Kenwood one. You can see like brown dials and things. So lock that in, lower the head down. Try to do it in front of the camera without being able to see what you're doing. And I put the bowl in the wrong way around, probably didn't help either. Lower the head down, running it on minimum speed to start off with, while I add the catalyst in, because it does splash around a bit and we want it to go in the silicone, not around the sides of the dish really. So I let that mix in a little bit and then just keep adding a little bit and a little bit and keep adding and adding and adding. It's important though that you don't dilly-dally around with this. You need to be adding a decent amount, but you know, not too slowly, because otherwise your silicone starts to set up. What I mean by set up, it starts to go off, and before you can get it into the mould, and you don't want that. You don't want a big block of silicone in your mixer really, with the head in the way. A little bit at a time, but enough so that that it mixes in quickly. So if you're doing this by hand, what you want to do is try not to get too much air in it. I'm using an electric mixer which is going to mix air into this. I'm fully aware of that, but the reason that I'm doing that is because, well, I'm lazy and I'm going to be using a vacuum chamber. Mixing silicone by hand, as you will probably find out, is quite taxing actually. I've done some of my 209 moulds at the beginning. I did by hand. I didn't have this mixer. I didn't have a vacuum chamber or anything, so I did it by hand. Now you can mix with the mixer and lay it up by hand. There's nothing to say that you can't. I'm turning it up now at the moment, but by turning it up I'm mixing additional air in it. If you were going to do this by hand, you'd want to keep it at a lower speed, get less air in it. So when you go to pour it, you can get rid of a lot of those bubbles. So I'll give that a minute mixing, just to make sure that that's fully mixed in, and then once that's had a little bit of time, I can lift that out, scrape off the edges of the bowl, because these mixers don't mix all the way to the edge, so I want to mix the white stuff that's stuck to the edge into the middle, and I just use a basic plastic spatula for that. So turn the mixer off, lift it up, get my spatula, scrape off off the mixing head, because there's going to be some white silicone on that. We want it all mixed in if possible, and this is where I'm getting all that stuff from the edges, and you'll see white streaks appear into the pink there as I go into the bottom of that bowl, just to make sure that that's all scraped up into the middle. And I'm trying to work quickly here because I've got a limited working time. It's about 10 to 15 minutes working time on this silicone, and I've got to get it into the vacuum chamber yet, so I'm trying to work as quickly as I can. Give the spatula a scrape off quickly. I'm not going to be too precious about how much silicone I lose. I don't want to lose too much, but you know, I also don't want to lose the entire batch because I'm messing around scraping off a spatula. Close it down, run it for a bit more just to make sure those white bits are completely mixed in, and put the spatula on a piece of blue roll there. That blue roll, absolutely essential in my workshop. I go through that stuff like nobody's business, you know, wiping the edges of boxes and all the rest of it, and you know, anytime you've got spills, and it's just fantastic stuff. So just making sure that that's all mixed in thoroughly. Just going to leave it for a minute. I think I might be in the background there getting the vacuum chamber ready. Yep, turn that off. Open that up, use the spatula again to kind of scrape stuff off, and then transfer that directly into the vacuum chamber. So this is a best value vacuum chamber. It was actually cheaper even in the UK to buy one from them, and they're in the US, and had this thing shipped in. So the push the lid on and realise I've actually got my valves open the wrong way around. Yeah, it was cheaper to ship it in than it was to buy one in the UK, basically. So what I'm actually doing here is I gave it a little push down, and the vacuum chamber is pulling the air out at the moment, and that's going to in turn create internal pressure within the actual chamber there. You can see that as this is going along, we are pulling the air out of the silicone. You can see it rising up like some sort of dough, and that bubbling is going to get a bit more violent as the air gets removed, and you'll see that the bubbles get bigger, it starts to rise a bit more, and then it will get quite violently bubbling, and then suddenly it will just collapse in on itself. And that's when you know you're at the point you're pretty much ready. Now I would normally leave it for a little bit after that collapsing, just to make sure that we've got rid of any of the bubbles that happened and caught up in the collapsing, and then I'd take it out. So we're getting to the point now it's gonna be ready to collapse very soon. Yeah, those bubbles are getting really big, and it's getting ready to go. Yeah, it's going to go in any second now. Look, here we go. Oof. And it all falls back in on itself. It just collapses in. Kind of looks like Freddy Krueger's face or Deadpool's face, whichever you prefer. And the bubbling really starts to calm down now. It's not quite as vigorous as it was before, because a lot of that air has just been expelled in that collapsing. Just giving it a little couple of minutes more, or a couple of seconds more after that that collapsing, just to make sure that we get as much air out of this as we can. And then what I'm going to do with that far valve, I'll turn that around so that it cuts off the vacuum pump, and then I'll turn the vacuum pump off and open up the valve that's closest to us with that black filter on the end of it, which is going to slowly open and let air in. If I'm going to open that valve quite slowly, because if I open it really quickly, it's going to let a lot of air in very, very quickly, and all of that silicone will just go poof up onto the inside of the vacuum chamber, and then all we got is a vacuum chamber full of silicone, and we don't have any in the pot, which we don't want, so we have to let that in slowly. So there we go, cutting off the vacuum, turn off the vacuum, and start bringing in that that live air pressure. Now what you can do is you can, once you've got the vacuum down, you can actually turn the vacuum pump off, close the valve like this, and as you can see, it will continue to bubble afterwards. But let's open that valve up, start to bring it in. You can see the air coming in, pushing against that silicone and creating a divot in the right hand side there. And I'm just letting the air slowly come in. And as the air comes in, I can, you know, increase the openness of that valve, because obviously it's not going to rush in as much when there's already pressure in there. It's not going to be quite as violent. We don't want to leave this too long because we do have a limited working time with the silicone. And open that the rest of the way. And now we've got to just pop the top off, take the silicone out, and take it over to our mould. Do love watching silicone bubble. So what I want to do is quickly spray on the inside of the mould. I usually do this a bit before I've actually mixed up the silicone. Usually while the silicone's in the vacuum chamber. So give it a good spray around, making sure I get the edges. This is going to, it doesn't stop anything really. When I say anything, I mean silicone won't stick to anything that we've got in there. What it's going to do is it's going to make it easier for it to release, that's all. Hopefully, he says. So I'll let my my colleague Stuart here do the pour on this one. He also mixed this particular batch. The one in the video just now was actually a different batch because I was showing him what to do. So I'm telling him here that we need to pour this into the corner of the mould. So he's going for that, for the right hand corner, and then changed his mind because he can see better in the other corner, which I agree. So at the moment this is quite a thick stream, not too much of a problem. We can see the occasional bubble coming in, so I've told him to lift it up so we can get a nice thin stream, keeping it in the corner so that it can basically roll over the part and not actually directly on the part, and keep it in those corners. As it fills up, it doesn't matter too much if you go onto the part a little bit, because hopefully that would have been covered, but because we left it so long, we've got some thickness there. So popping the bubbles with a pencil, and just giving the top a spray with some spray release, just to kind of remove some surface tension, so that will level out shortly as well. This is the second half of the mould I'm preparing for now, just removing the previous piece, using a Stanley knife to trim off the edges there. Obviously you need a fresh blade for that. Just trim those off just to make sure it lays flat when we turn it over, and peel off all of that plasticine, oil-based clay, using a clay tool or something, or a knife. Remove all the clay, and I'm using a knife there as well to remove any flashing that's managed to get behind the model there. Just cut around and remove any of that flashing. We don't need that, that's going to be a problem later on. Make sure it's nice and clean, and the second half of the mould will fill in any problems there anyway, so that's going to be fine. Put the box back on, give it a good squeeze together, make sure it's all clamped up. Just making sure I'm happy with the fit here. And it's good and tight. And spray it out with a mould release, obviously, because when we pour this silicone in, we don't want the two halves of silicone to bond together. So I'm pouring this silicone into the corner, and I'm making sure I have a nice thin stream. This is going to burst any bubbles as it comes down through that stream. I'm pouring it into a corner and not over the actual part, so I'll allow it to flow and fill out. Obviously this video is in sped up, so And once I've got the part covered, it doesn't really matter too much if I dump the rest in. I just need to make sure it's thick enough and give the bowl a little bit of a scrape there and get rid of any of the big chunks. I leave a lot of it in the bowl as well to set, and then I can peel it out later. It's easier for clean up. Use a pencil to poke the bubbles and spray it with some mold release just to remove the surface tension. So this is the next day. It's all set up. I'm pulling it away from the edges, pull it out of that mold, and then work around the edges until I've got a hole and I can see that I've got a gap there, and I can work around. And I have had some bleed across the around the side of the mold, which make it a little bit difficult, so I'm having to trim that with a knife, but I got it apart. Give it a squeeze, remove the original, and there's the cast parts. Give it a quick trim, remove any excess around the bottom edge so it's nice and square. And that's pretty much everything I need. Just make sure it's nice and clean, it fits together. Now I'm going to cut in a pour spout, a sprue if you will, and just going to make sure that I give myself a little funnel at the top there to pour my resin in. Later on I would actually put in air vents as well. So that is 2-part silicone mold making. We've got our silicone mold for our Mega Man there, and also for the counter for our Connect 4 garden size game, and those molds have turned out great. I'm really pleased with the quality of these, and they're going to give us many pulls. So thank you very much for watching. To subscribe, click up here for a video on casting from these molds. I'm going to put those at the bottom here for you guys to have a look at as soon as they're available. So thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.